Hey, John, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. So let me just tell everybody about John Strawbridge. You can see him up on the monitor right now. But John has worn many hats in the industry, including casting, writing. He's an author and a director. And before we discuss what actors need to do to get themselves or to give themselves their best opportunity to getting booked in a film, I'd like to talk with you just a little bit about the casting of a film project, because this is something that people, unless you're involved in the casting business, you probably have no knowledge of. So maybe you can explain to everybody what exactly are the responsibilities of a casting director.
Yeah, well, for me, there's a real big difference, and for most casting directors, between the casting process and the audition process. And what we have to do in the casting process is put together a group of actors, of talent, that all are going to work together with one another and work with the kind of director's vision and style. So our responsibility is really going to be to the director on the artistic side to give him or her that ensemble. And on the producer's side, to do that in budget and in a way that's going to bring an audience and satisfy an audience. The audition side, of course, is what actors see as the day-to-day in terms of actually just doing the reads, bringing in actors and trying to sort of fill out those roles that were given as part of the cast.
And I mean, could you talk a little bit about what process do you go through when you're getting ready to actually cast something?
Well, like everything, it begins with the script. You know, we're usually given the script first, and we've got to read that through several times. We've got to read it through once just for the tone and the nature of the piece. We got to read it again and do a breakdown, page by page, line by line, for each of the characters to kind of figure out, you know, what characters are we actually casting, what's their description, what's their type, is there any kind of flexibility on that type. And then we got to, you know, as much as possible, work with the director. And if we're working on a project on the East Coast and the director's on the West Coast, a lot of times that's going to be happening over the phone. But we got to research that director, see what his or her style is. Do they tend to go with very sort of naturalistic actors, or more sort of stylized or larger performances? So we got to begin to kind of get our mindset in what the director of this particular piece is looking for.
And how do you actually even decide, you know, who to bring in for a role? Is it strictly from looking at a headshot, or do you go out and watch, you know, theater a lot, or how do you decide on that?
It's yes to all of the above. And because you certainly, you've got to go, there's definitely the raw footwork of going through headshots and going through either the body of people that you've known as a casting director and thinking about what's appropriate, going through headshots to come in as you submit, looking at each headshot against a particular role. And that's something that people need to understand about the casting process, is that we're not looking for the best actor. We're not looking for the most experienced or even necessarily the most talented actor, but we're looking for, okay, here's a role that I've got to fill, a role as part of this larger cast. And who among these headshots and these resumes seems to kind of fill that role just right, seems to really fill that outline. And that's going to be different from project to project. There's people that I'm going to call in for this particular drama, the sort of low-key, intimate drama, that are going to be really right for that role, that I'm not even going to look at for you know, a lighter drama, or certainly a comedy, or a light comedy versus a dark comedy, or, you know, there's no sort of one standard of, oh, that's a good actor.
Yeah, I guess the tricky thing too is, you know, what your concept of what the character should look like in reality might be very different from a film point of view. I remember I've heard you talk about casting police officers in The Wire. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's a good example, is that when we did The Wire, which, if people have watched it, was, you know, in its inception, it was a gritty reality kind of show. I mean, it was taken from real stories and real people. And so what we definitely try to do on the show is present that as natural and as true to life as possible. So early on in the show, I had the opportunity to be at the courthouse on an unrelated matter, but never mind. But I was looking at the police officers there, you know, that were there for the various court cases, and you have this image of a police officer being kind of a tough guy and able to manhandle people and sort of a big white guy in his 30s. Or alternatively, you've got that image of sort of the heavyset guy with his coffee and donuts, but whichever kind of stereotype you come from. But these guys I'm seeing in the courthouse they're skinny, they're balding, they've got big horn-rimmed glasses, or they're big, or they're tall, or they're fat. I mean, and it's just this great cross-section of humanity. And I'm realizing that I, as a casting person, need to be more realistic and more varied in how I'm casting the police officers. So that's what I do. And that's great for about a week until I get a call from the producers and say, what the is wrong with the cops? These guys, they've got to be big, they've got to be muscular, they've got to be in their 30s. And the producers really ended up wanting this kind of stereotype of the cop because they needed the audience to get a story from how we cast it. And they needed the audience to without questioning, get this story that, okay, these are cops. And as soon as the guy walks on the screen, they're not questioning and being distracted from the story and from the larger idea of what's going on. So our standard, our gold standard in casting, even when you're going for quote-unquote reality, is what does the audience accept? What is their language? What do they understand in terms of how these roles are going to go? So to that degree, you've got to kind of know your audience as well as your director. And it's different for cable audience or for network audience or for feature film or for commercial industry. You really have to take what the audience's perceptions are into account.
So, which makes it even more difficult for the actor because, you walk in there and you give a read, you think it went well, and you don't get callbacks, you don't get the job, and you're thinking, well, they must have hated what I did. Well,
right. Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons that you may not get cast, and obviously it's my goal as a casting director, if I'm looking for the cop or the lawyer or whatever it is, to bring in 10 or 15 or maybe 20 really capable people. And my hope is that all 20 of those people could do the role. My hope is that I'm not bringing in anybody that can't do the role. But the person that's going to get the role is going to be the person that fills out that outline for the director and what the director's idea of the audience. But that also can be a tool for the actor if you know how to use that and how to think about that.
And what are some of those tricks for the actor to be thinking about?
Well, you got to approach the audition process from an actor standpoint as not what can I as the actor do? What can I show them? How can I show them what a good actor I am? But you gotta the audition process for the actors is about showing us how can I solve their problem? How can I fit this role in a way that's going to be more effective? And people who've heard my classes before know that I don't like the ideas of good acting or bad acting. For me, it's all about whether or not you are effective, meaning do you affect an audience, do you communicate to an audience? So it's a good idea and a good strategy for an actor rather than looking at, okay, what can I do with this role, but to look at it as, okay, what does this role need? How can I, what's the audience going to be like for this role, and how can I speak to them? What does the director need from this role in terms of the story, and how can I give that to the director? And to ask those kinds of questions. And once you start to look at a role like that, it's really helpful for an actor because it really gives you focus, and it really gives you go from this vague kind of idea of, oh man, I got to nail this role, to a much more specific idea of, okay, I've got to communicate this idea, I've got to appear this way to the audience, I've got to provide this fulcrum for the director.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. I had a couple of auditions in New York about 10 days ago, and one of them was for Boardwalk Empire, and it was so hard. And I was trying to think in those terms, but one thing that was challenging was I had no idea what ultimately the director is really needing or wanting in this particular role. And so what would you say to an actor who really can't figure out what the director is looking for because all you see are the sides, which is the short portion of the script that we're auditioning with. So we really don't have all that much to go on at that point. What would you say to an actor in that kind of situation?
Well, first of all, I know you will have done this because I know you're an actor, but if for an actor that hasn't already, before you even get to that audition stage, if you know what the show is, research the show. It's easy to see episodes of Boardwalk Empire, for instance, and know what the tone of the show is, and know what the style of the performance is. And with the TV show, it's going to be much more a matter of what the producers want, their style, than the director's style. But if it was a feature film, you'd want to look at that director's projects and see, okay, what kind of work, what kind of performances does that director. So that's stuff that all has to go in the background. Now, when you're there with the sides, there's a lot that can be gotten out of the sides in terms of not just, what roles my character playing in the story, how's my character interacting with the other characters. But there's also a lot that you can ask about what's not there. Okay, why doesn't this happen, or why is this question left unanswered? But all that aside, once you've gone as far as you can with that, yeah, there's always going to be questions that you can't answer as the actor, and that's reasonable and that's fair. And you got to not punish yourself for that. And what you have to be able to do at that point is make a choice and make a solid choice. Don't hedge your bets, because it's much better to make a wrong choice and show the casting director and the director that you're an actor that can come to a conclusion, that can make a choice and play that choice, and let them want to give you a different direction. Let them be interested enough in the choices that you make that they say, okay, that was interesting, but try it like this. And if you get them to say, try it like this, then that audition has been successful. Whether or not you get the role, you've at least shown them that you're an actor that's worth working with.
And, and it's interesting that you brought that up, because I've had a number of people say to me, apparently they just don't like what I'm doing. I've auditioned for this show, 5, 8, 9 times, and I get callbacks. I never get the part. They must hate what I'm doing. And my feeling is, what are you, crazy? They love you. I assume, and maybe you can speak from a casting director's point of view, I assume you would never call somebody back in again for just a regular audition unless you really liked what they did the first time.
Of course, yeah. And going back to Homicide, we had one actor that used to put little tick marks. We didn't know till years later, but he put little tick marks on the wall behind the chair how many times he'd been in. I don't recommend that, by the way. I'm not endorsing that to deface the casting director's property. But absolutely, somebody that comes in and again, people always say the worst thing you do is blow an audition. The worst thing you can do, from my standpoint as a casting director, is be boring in an audition. Is be. And I'm not sure it's right to say too safe, but to not make a choice, to play the middle of the road. And those are the people that, yeah, I'm not calling them again. But if I call you back, if you're coming back, there's people that we've stuck with over the course of the TV series that I've cast, years, literally bringing them back for years, just trying to find the right fit and the right moment. And even the producers would be, oh, it's Aaron again. Yeah. But and we've got different directors for different episodes, and so eventually you kind of get behind it. You've actually got a casting director who's behind you as an actor if they're really trying to try again.
I mean, have you ever had an actor where the guy's been called in, so many times that you actually start feeling bad, and you actually ask a director, hey, could you do me a favor? Just give him something. Just give him one word on this show, please. The guy's good. We've brought him in a lot. Can you fit him in any place?
I won't say there aren't times we will stick our neck out for an actor that we believe in, but I probably wouldn't do exactly that, because if I cared that much, I wouldn't want that actor to have the one-line role. And those are the things that go on in casting that might surprise actors. There are times when, there's an actor that I think is really strong, and, some that I think would be good for like a multi-episode arc, maybe a 2 or 3 episode arc. And the director will say, well, I don't like him for the part you brought him in for. Let's bring him in for the waiter. And we'll tell the director, no, it turns out he's not available. And the actor doesn't know that we just cost him a role, but I'm not going to waste this actor on the one-line waiter when I know this is somebody that I need down the line to carry a bigger story or a bigger character. And those are the kinds of things that you have to do as a casting director, particularly on a series. On a film, if the waiter was all that was left, you give him the waiter. But on a series, it's really for the casting director the art of managing the whole series, of finding the best actor for this moment in this role, rather than just kind of blowing all your best actors in episodes 1 and 2.
Maybe you could, if you would, just kind of walk people through the process of how things work. From the casting office, you're going to call uh, either an agent or a manager. I know in some markets, sometimes they go directly to the actors, but that's more unusual. And then you call somebody in for the audition. Typically, are they going to get the sides ahead of time, or do they get the sides when they first walk into the audition?
More and more you're going to get, and particularly and there's a big difference between the New York and LA markets and everywhere else. So it's funny because when you talk about, something that's done more often, it's probably done more often outside of New York or in LA, but it's done more commonly in those two markets where most of the film and TV is produced. And in those major markets, you're almost certainly going to get the sides ahead of time, because those markets have things like Sides Express and different sides on demands where once you get the audition, they'll tell you where to go online to download those sides. Outside of those markets, and I've done a lot of work in DC, Baltimore, and places where that system isn't really in place, you're not as likely to get the sides, because for me to spend, if I've got 60 people coming in tomorrow, that's 3 hours of standing by the fax machine or trying to upload. That's just not a practical use of time. And for myself, as a matter of preference, I always prefer the cold read, because I really like to see, one of the things I'm looking for in an audition, and I said before, it's not necessarily about the best actor, but I'm really looking for an actor's ability to make and come to choices, because time on set is precious. So I like to see, even if I know, and of course I know if I'm doing cold reads, I know it's not a polished, it's not a finished performance. I get that. I've done this enough years that you don't have to be concerned that I'm seeing a cold performance. But it really helps me see what an actor does as far as making choices, him or herself, rather than what that actor's coach may have done with that one scene that we may not get with the other scenes that are going to turn up in that script.
So then basically, after they come in, and let's say they're not in a city where they're getting the sides ahead of time, they're handed the sides, they're looking at things, they walk in, they're going to sit down with a video camera, there'll be a casting director, and then typically they'll have a reader, somebody who's reading the lines opposite to them.
Right, and most often, and again, in the secondary markets outside of New York or LA, it's just like you said. You sign in. Some places are going to take you in the order you sign in. Some places are pretty deliberate about your appointment time. But yeah, you'll do that. You'll do that scene either for the casting director or possibly for an assistant. And if you're lucky, and if there's plenty of time, you'll get a rehearsal. And that's that moment when hopefully you'll get them to see what you're doing and say, okay, make this adjustment. And you gotta really hear what they're saying and make that adjustment pretty quickly, and then they'll put that on tape. And for the most part, the directors could, and I had an actress asking me about this actually a couple of days ago. It's like, do you think they're just going to erase my performance? And sometimes that happens, not as often as you might think. Sometimes the director's not seen everybody that went on tape, but most often they are. But more and more, I'm also seeing in the LA market, for instance, when you're going in for things like CSI or NCIS, you're going straight to the casting director. There's no tape. There's often no callbacks. Right. A lot of times the casting director's making that decision with you in that office on the spot there as to whether or not they want to look at you again. So it's again, it's one of the things that's really different between the New York, LA markets versus the everywhere else market.
Now, is there anything that an actor can do to help or perhaps hurt their chances, during the audition? I mean, besides not having a specific direction as far as the character. Besides, that, can you think of anything else that would be helpful or detrimental to an actor?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's obviously a bunch, and I always like to point out to actors that an audition is really a job interview. And if you look at the SAG contract, that's what they call it. They call it the interview. And so all the same kind of things apply. Whether or not you're on time or late is going to make a big difference. Whether or not you handle yourself in a professional way. Do you seem to have all your stuff together? Is your headshot and resume handy? Are you, prepared with your scene? Are you comfortable in your scene? And there's a lot of times actors will come in and they'll be, in all good intention, they'll be very grateful for the audition. Oh, I'm so thankful. I've wanted to do this for years. I appreciate, and they're so enthusiastic that you begin to think, man, will no one hire this person? How desperate are they for work? So you've really got to come in with that attitude that you're not you're sort of beseeching at the altar, but that you are one of our peers. You are a professional. You're going to help us solve this problem of filling this role by making choices and playing the choices that you're able to make.
And I'm not saying this because for ulterior motives, but I have heard of a number of situations where actors might walk into the casting office and they're kind of rude to the person behind the front desk, whether it's a secretary, and at some point, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later, all of a sudden that secretary is now a casting director someplace, and they remember that actor who was really nasty to them, and it's probably not a coincidence that that actor will not get a chance to audition for that person. So I always found that it's really important to be nice to people at the audition. And once again, it's not because there's ulterior motives. Maybe they're going to become somebody that could be helpful to me, but I think it just creates a nicer atmosphere, for people when...
Yeah. It's just so easy to forget that the business is a business, particularly when you're dealing with network and feature film kind of stuff. And we're looking at things like, time. We're looking at how you're going to be with the crew and with the other cast members on set. And we're in a situation, and I don't mean this to sound elitist at all, but we're in a situation with network TV and feature film where we've got enough people. We're not desperate for actors, so we can afford to cast the actor that we want to work with, who's got a personality and a discipline that's going to enhance our set, and not a star, a big name, a personality you put up with. Anybody else you don't hire.
And then I guess if they start acting out on the set after they have been hired, the writers find a way of making that character die in the series.
Yeah, we can always tell on in the TV season when contracts come up for renewal, because that's when major characters start getting shot in a suspenseful cliffhanger. That could go either way.
So thanks, John, so much so far. We've got a couple questions. You mind if I jump in with them here, Aaron?
Actually, I just have one more really important question I wanted to ask John, and then sure, let's open it up for questions. A number of people have asked me, can a non-union actor ever get cast in a union project, in a TV series that's union or a feature film?
Sure. From our standpoint in the casting, our requirement working on a union project is that if we hire a non-union person, it's got to be because no one else existing in the union could fill the role, either because we don't have enough of the right race or the right type or the right particular talent. And of all the hundreds of thousands of members of SAG, none of them were born with a SAG after a card, or whatever the new merged union will be called. So, if for 100,000 people, there's 100,000 ways of doing it. So absolutely, we can, but there's just got to be a reason why.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Hey, Joel, if there are some questions, sure.
Michael asks, would you mind defining, John, what it means to be boring in an audition?
Boring is to make the obvious, the safe choices, to sort of, it's what I call the connect the dots or paint by numbers. You do everything right. There's nothing particularly wrong with your performance, but there's nothing particularly, there's no statement to it. There's no choice to say, okay, I need to make this happen, or I need to establish this. Which is not to say that I want everyone to go in and try to steal the scene. If you really do have the role of the waiter, it's not your scene. But make sure that you are. But it's all about making choices. That you are making a choice and not just, playing, as I said, playing it safe.
Well, John, excuse me one more second. It kind of reminded me when you asked me to be a reader for a film that you were actually directing. And there was a gentleman who came in who was a bartender, and this speaks to what you were talking about, is understanding your place in this particular scene. And instead of the guy, I still remember the words, his line was, "What can I get you to drink?" And basically, it should have been, his choice should have been a very low-keyed, "What can I get you to drink?" And instead, he was trying to make the scene about himself, and he made this a very powerful, what can I get you to drink? And I think that's also another good reason of, making sure that you do make a choice, and sometimes that choice is to really underplay it.
Yeah, and in that case, the choice was about letting the audience see how you feel about the person you're talking to. And it had nothing to do with serving a drink or being a bartender, which is why I say you really got to understand what goes into the script. So the choice would have been create a relationship with the person you're talking to, even for that one line.
Right. That's great. We got a question from Chelsea, and this is an actual great question to end on. She says, if you could only give one piece of advice that you think is the most important thing to know for a young, aspiring actress, what would it be?
Oh, good. I need another half hour. One piece of advice, it would really be probably one of the things I said already, make a choice, whether it's in terms of your headshot, in terms of how you market yourself, in terms of what you're doing with the scene. Make a choice and have a reason for that choice, even at the risk of knowing that if I do this, some people are going to love me, some people are going to hate me. But it's worth having people hate you to have people love you professionally.
Great. Hey, John, I know we're going to have to wind things up. I want to let everybody know John wrote a great book. It's called The Audition Book. It's right on the website. Actually, the website is theauditionbook.com. You can see it on the PowerPoint right now on the monitor, and you can get a copy there. And John, besides being just a really very talented guy, just to let everybody know, John is also one of the really, really nice human beings in this industry, and I took a class with John. Just a very talented guy, and always love spending time with you, man.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.